Hello, and welcome back to WGBH's Drama After Dark, where tonight we are talking about Call The Midwife, Season 9, Episode 6. I'm your host, Jackie Bruley, joined as always by the delightful Andrea Willan, my co-host. And we have a very special guest here tonight. We have Ananda Lowe, a doula. Thanks for joining us. We're so delighted that you could join in the call. So we're going to kick things off with the speed recap. And unfortunately, I think it falls on me to do that duty tonight.
It does. And remember that if you mess up this week, I have an H and an O in our horse game of getting these right.
I am keeping that in mind. I hope I have two sides of the note card, guys. I don't know. I might have really overextended myself here. We're going to see what happens.
This might be my week. Making a comeback.
All right, everybody ready?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot happened this week. Julianne's secret the upcoming demolition is out, and everyone is worried, including Baby Doctor, who's back to help Dr. Turner and dispense painkillers for Sister Frances's cramps. Speaking of the Turners, they hit a snag with May's adoption. Her mom is still alive and doesn't want to give her up. It's a mess. Across town, Lucille, Trixie, and Val help Val's cousin Maureen deliver her baby, who unfortunately has some serious birth complications because of mom's rubella and dies. And in happy news, Fred throws an agricultural fair and everyone loves it.
Oh, no! Great recap. Alas for me, I'm going to have to succeed next week or get even closer to the full HORSE.
I believe in you. Next week is your week, Andrea.
Thank you. I'll try. But before we go back to your recap and get into the favorite moments, I thought now would be a good time for us to interview Ananda and learn a little bit more about her.
I completely agree. Let's get into it.
Okay.
So first things first, can you tell our audience a little bit about what does a doula do, which is a very fun phrase to say, and how is it different from a midwife?
Oh, sure. I have been a doula here in the Boston area for 24 and a half years.
Whoa.
And I was around when the doula movement was getting started, or a few years after it first got started. And I've always worked here in the Boston area. And there is some overlap between the work that doulas perform and the work that midwives perform. And I'll say that in the year 2020, things look different than they did in the 1950s and 60s. when we see the midwives of Poplar serving their clientele, and they're in a transition from home birth to hospital birth, and then here in the U.S. in 2020, we are giving birth mostly in hospitals. And not only are we giving birth in hospitals, but we no longer have the family doctor who sees, or the community midwife who sees the expectant mother, the expectant parents through their pregnancy, and then returns for the birth itself. We don't have that. I've really seen that in the, I've been working now over the span of a generation, and I've pretty much seen that go away almost entirely. So the quick answer, a doula, the difference between a doula and a midwife, a midwife is in the role of doing what we traditionally think of as delivering the baby and assuming responsibility for the mother, the baby, and the family in that way. A doula does not do what we refer to as deliver the baby, but we provide very intensive one-on-one emotional and physical support to the family. And in fact, I'll even say that when I've been present in the hospital recently, even after all these years of being involved in my work, I've really noticed something. I've looked around the room. Sometimes there might be 2 obstetricians, 2 nurses, a pediatrician. There's usually, there could be between 2 and 5 medical professionals in the room. And it's really interesting to look around and to realize that no one is designated on the hospital team to provide emotional care.
Mm-hmm.
No one has that designated as their role.
Mm-hmm.
You know, maybe if there's a hospital social worker, that might be the closest thing to it, but that's not somebody who visits during childbirth.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's nobody designated to have that role, and yet here we are having this profoundly emotional experience. For many people, it's the most emotional experience of their life, and a doula does take that role when we're able to participate. And I like to say that we match the intensity emotionally of what's happening and make it less scary. And then there's also a medical result, which is that people have better birth outcomes when they feel safe and accompanied, and when there is somebody in that role. So oftentimes we're the only person who's designated to give emotional care, and I think that is so important. And when we see the midwives doing that in the show. However, as the decades have passed, and now midwives in hospitals might be caring for 2, 3, 4, or 5 women on the same day, giving birth at the same time in the hospital, that the ability to provide that one-to-one support is being lost further. And one other quick thing I'll say is that we also serve as what I'll call patient advocates. So I'll talk a little bit more about that probably later.
Awesome. So, out of curiosity, you mentioned this rather a little bit in our pre-chat before the show. How has that support changed during the COVID-19 pandemic?
We are, as doulas, we are attending births and supporting women and their partners during childbirth, and we're doing it by Zoom.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. So just like working at home for the rest of us, except a little more, I assume, emotionally strenuous, though.
Pajama pants and a Zoom
Some people might disagree.
It's a little bit, it's definitely been a strange process of adapting. For us. It just like you said, like everybody else who's working remotely right now, we've been figuring that out on the fly, and we're at the point where we're we've made those adaptations, and it's actually possible to do it. And we feel as doulas, I think my colleagues would agree that actually the support is more important than ever. So we're actually providing a disaster management service. We're supporting people even though it has to be done remotely, because doulas are unfortunately banned from hospital as additional bodies right now. Because of infection risks. So, but the need for emotional support is in some ways greater than it's ever been.
I mean, as somebody who's been in the hospital with people who have serious illnesses, I can't imagine how much more scared you might be if, there's this huge inflated danger and risk, and to you yourself and your newborn child. Like, that's a lot. So I definitely agree with you that there probably is an enhanced need there. When there isn't a COVID-19 crisis going on, what is your favorite part of your job?
Let's see. Lots of favorite parts of the job. Still happy to be doing this work after almost a quarter of a century.
Oh my gosh.
in my case, started out in my mid-20s.
Wow.
And I think something I'll pick as one of my favorite parts of the job is seeing women, new mothers, new parents, finding a voice. And that happens simultaneously with this this, powerful and intense emotional and physical experience that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that our healthcare system is operating currently, there is a need, even though things have changed since the time that's depicted in the TV show. We kind of have some new issues on our hands, and we're using so much more technology.
Mm-hmm.
And we're applying so much more technology to birth. Some people have compared modern childbirth to an intensive care experience.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I can see that.
Yeah.
I can see that.
There are so many tubes that can be attached to a person, and the monitoring, the medical monitoring that needs to happen requires the same ratio of nursing care that you would have in an intensive care unit.
Oh my gosh.
We can't have, one nurse taking care of a bunch of patients at once. So when it comes to the nursing, it's the same ratio as an intensive care unit. Mm-hmm. But anyway, using so much, we're applying so much technology to birth, and therefore the patients, the families who are going through the experience actually have a lot more to contend with, a lot more information to learn and become informed about. Mm-hmm. And we're all learning as a society how to have informed consent conversations.
Yes.
Which is something I'm really passionate about right now. We, consent has been a topic of national conversation for the last couple of years in terms of people's personal lives, their, intimate and sexual relationships. And the exact same principles apply all throughout life, including in women's health care and in birthing care. So you take a situation where someone is they're kind of at the height of vulnerability, they're in labor, and the laboring person, the birthing person's consent is really required when all of this technology is being applied, and there's so much going on, and yet most of us were probably raised in such a way that we don't have much practice asking for consent or giving consent. And so when I see that happening, and sometimes it's in the course of one birth, I'll see a mother, a pregnant woman, laboring, and over the course of, let's say, 24 hours, I can actually witness her finding her voice more and more, asking for the information she needs, expressing her wishes, requests, and preferences, and coming out at the end with a stronger voice, just from having gone through this experience and having been under this pressure. And that's I think that's probably my favorite thing about the job, is to see somebody find their voice under pressure. And of course, there's all kinds of other wonderful things. It's a peak life experience. It's incredible.
That's
and
wonderful.
That actually ties perfectly into tonight's episode, where we see, I mean, obviously this is not the character Maureen's first kid, but this whole arc with her and baby Warren is very much a real, like, growth opportunity for that whole family, a really sad one. Hi, everyone! We're back with Drama After Dark! Thank you all for your patience, and we're so sorry about this. The joys of remote live streaming cannot be understated. Hope you all stuck around. We're going to get right back into it and talk about our favorite moments from tonight's episode.
So we were actually coming out of Ananda's interview last time we started Favorite Moments.
It's true.
And we had discussed how important it was for Maureen and her husband to find their voice during this episode, with all the trials and tribulations that they went through, and how so many of our favorite moments from this episode came from that birth specifically. And I know, Jackie, that you had one.
Yes, I in particular thought it was really nice to see Maureen's husband being a little involved, from him, sticking with her with the castor oil, running into the room with that clock at the end.
Yes.
And then he being such a wonderful partner as they were dealing with Warren's diagnosis and eventual death. Like, that family really was wonderful to watch this episode, and they're really sweet, and I like them a lot. I'm sorry something bad happened to them.
Yeah, I think especially because you start off the episode not really liking Maureen because of previous episodes and then how she acts towards Trixie. And Ananda, you had a really good comment about the party that they throw for baby Warren.
Yeah, I think my favorite moment of the episode surrounds that the party, and just before the party, Maureen says to her husband, "This is our baby's life right here and right now, and we're going to make the most of it. It's only going to be a few days long." And it reminds me of what we're going through with coronavirus. I have a loved one in a facility who has coronavirus, and how do we make the most of these moments under conditions where there's the medical needs are so pressing, but the emotional needs are just as important. And as a doula, I'm always thinking about that.
Yeah. And I think that in so many ways that party was the icing on the cake for them on how to enjoy their child's life and how to celebrate him in the short amount of time that they had. And I think also, to your point, the emotional moment that they gave to Lucille, who was the midwife there, by presenting her with a photo of baby Warren. And it was a very sweet moment, because there are in life some people who stick with you. And I would think if you're a midwife to a child who is in that state, you're going to remember him, and his life is going to stick with you like that. So I personally loved that moment a lot.
It was just a really wonderful episode. I think there were so many really touching moments, in addition to some beautiful bright spots. But because we're running a little bit late, we're gonna leave with that, just talking about that wonderful family, and go on to our checking of what's going on online, because we got some wonderful comments, and I don't want to leave them unanswered. So remember, folks, if you're at home, you can send us questions for us or for Ananda, and you can do that on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube. We see them, we read them, we will put them on the show. So come at us. We'd love to share those. And for example, we've got two really great ones, both from a Linda on Facebook, two different Lindas actually, one of whom says, "Yay, Ananda," and one says, "So proud of you."
Yay!
Linda fan club.
All right. Thank you, Linda and Linda.
We're delighted to have you on. So they're vibing with us today on that one.
Yes, we're all our Linda tonight.
We're all our Linda in our heart.
We also have a comment from Anthony who says, "What you provide for mothers and new parents is incredible. Thank you for what you do." Thank you for that comment, Anthony. That's great. And we have a couple of other moments that people really liked through tonight's episode, although a lot of it was just like, I'm crying. One that I really enjoyed was from @skibats on Twitter, who says, "Call the midwife, tissues, please." And then just all of those like crying teardrop emojis, like 4 of them.
Same.
Which is a huge mood.
Yeah.
We also would love it if you would weigh in our Twitter poll, because as you know, if you watch the show, we're going to do a little debate in a second, and we want to know what you guys think out in Twitterland. So if you are on Facebook, take a second and open up Twitter in another tab and go vote in that poll. And if you're on Twitter, just scroll down. It's right underneath the video that we're doing. We have one more quote on Facebook, a comment from Maria, who says, "Thanks for representing doulas, Ananda. So great to see you."
Oh, yay.
Nice.
So that's good. Keep them coming, guys. We love to see these. And yeah, we're gonna hop over to Twitter in a second. But first, okay, we've got another one also from a Maria.
Oh boy.
You guys, they're doubling up the names. This is amazing. And they're different last names. I'm not making this up. Who says, "Ananda!" exclamation points. You're a pillar of the women's health community in Boston. Love you, my friend.
Oh, love you too.
Beautiful. And I had to convey it with all the exclamation points because I love that.
Of course.
And we've got one more from Celeste who says, so proud of you, Ananda, and grateful for your expertise and the privilege of working with you.
Oh, beautiful.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. Keep those comments coming. We are going to come and check back on this phone again later, and Zach will keep putting those comments in there. But first, I think we're going to take it to another level with a little bit of a hot take debate.
Mm-hmm. So our hot take debate this week is how much information is too much information in both medical situations and in a labor situation. And what we're going to do is shake it up a little this week, and Jackie and I are going to say our sides, and then we're going to throw to Ananda because she is the professional in the room today,
Yes,
and
indeed.
she actually knows these situations, unlike us, having never been in labor or helped somebody in labor.
Both true facts.
Yes, yes.
Would you like to kick it off, Andrea?
I will.
Go for it.
So, I sort of brought this up because there is the moment where Lucille is examining Warren and Maureen keeps asking her what's wrong. And Lucille's sort of like, oh, let's just wait for the doctor to get here. And I've been in hospitals with people who are ill before and on inpatient basis. And it was very similar to things that I saw during that. And I know in that situation and I imagine in this situation, I found it very frustrating to not have all the information and to have to wait for the information. And I personally would rather have it up front and know what I was contending against. Like, I get that there could be legal ramifications for doctors and they don't want to make a diagnosis, or nurses don't want to make a diagnosis straight off the bat, but I would rather have them say, look, your baby's blue tinge could signify this or this or this or this. Like, it's bad news, but we're going to wait for the doctor to get here and he will help us from there. I would much rather be in that situation. Jackie?
Well, I am going to disagree with you.
Okay.
Partly because it's the whole point of this segment, but partly because I actually do disagree a little bit. So, I in general do agree. I would like a lot of information. That said, I think there are two pitfalls here. The first one is that we aren't living in 1965, and we have a lot more exposure to medical stuff just from like the ether of, I don't know, living through a global pandemic.
WebMD.
And WebMD. So if we see these things happening, we can just go down a Google hole and find out, potentially really terrible things that may not be accurate. So I think sometimes a little bit of information can spiral you into the worst possible outcome spot, which is scary and unnecessary most of the time, or hopefully most of the time. And then my main thing is, I think that a lot of times when we see this on the show, someone is literally right in the middle of giving birth. And I don't think that I would have the mental capacity to be like mid-labor and get some bad news. I don't want to know. I want to wait until everything is done and I have a mental space to process it.
Yeah.
But
I'm the exact opposite. That is my focus. Like, much like, cause I am less so now, but have been scared of flying for a very long time, and just loading my brain up with as much information as possible about how planes work, what happens during flying, what happens if there's a issue during flying, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, gives me something to focus on in that moment of stress. So I feel like somebody being like, hey, the baby's breech, I'd be like, that's terrible, but okay, I know.
So from like an actual medical standpoint or the standpoint of experience, Ananda, what are your thoughts on this? And how does our modern sensibility sort of mesh with what's going on since the show is set in the 1960s?
Well, I see both of your points. And as a doula, my colleagues and I, when we're providing care and support, that's one of the things we want to know about the woman or the couple that we're caring for. We want to tell us what they know about themselves. Will they feel more comforted by having more information, or by having a bit less. I remember working with one family, and the expectant mother said that she wanted to be overinformed. And
Girl,
she
great
used
way
that
to phrase
word.
that.
That was the word she used, and I thought that was great, and I've used that ever since, because it really underscores how that some people really want and need that. It also, for me, really comes down to some issues that you could call, legal, ethical, and philosophical, having to do with how much involvement are women allowed and supported to have in decisions about their own bodies and decisions about their own babies.
Absolutely.
So we're at a point in history where legally and ethically there's a pretty broad agreement that that care should be provided in a way that where the woman herself can be fully involved. However, we don't have all of the structures in place. Many of us have never practiced at things such as asking for consent, for whether it's medical consent or any other kind of consent. And many of us don't have practice at granting consent, or having an information exchange that fully empowers the person whose body and whose immediate family is being affected. A lot of us don't have a practice at that, and we need to find the ways to get up to speed with how to do that. But yes, there's definitely a nuance, kind of moment by moment, how much information is going to feel appropriate and supportive. But as a broader kind of ethical idea, I feel strongly that the woman should be, completely involved.
Yeah. Totally agree on that. Absolutely on my side. Agree on that. Jackie might be a little different, but again, like you're saying, it's sort of a philosophical, personal thing in some ways too.
Well, and you know what's pretty interesting? I checked the Twitter poll, and we have an exact 50-50 split.
Oh, wow. That hasn't happened before.
We've ever had happen.
Yeah.
I'm curious if that will keep happening, but we're going to have to see. So keep voting, guys. That's fascinating.
Really cool.
Yeah. And, of course, keep the questions and comments coming. And in the meantime, we are going to head into one of my favorite segments that we haven't gotten to do in a little while. So, Andrea, I hope you're ready for the return of If You Like This. I have
you just like saying it.
Yeah, I have to say it in the dumbest way possible. It's delightful for all of us.
For you.
Well, at least it's fun for me.
At least it's fun for somebody.
It is. So this is the segment where we like to find something that we can recommend for folks to watch or listen to or read that is similar to what we saw in tonight's episode. So I'm happy to go first if you guys want to think about what your recommendations might be. I'm going to recommend, for fans of drama and fans of Call The Midwife, and particularly this episode, Downton Abbey, specifically the arc where we learn about Edith and her daughter Marigold, who, if you haven't seen the show, it's been out for a long time, so I don't feel super bad about spoiling this, but she briefly puts up for fostering and then adoption, and then eventually she comes back to live with Edith, which is really interesting as it parallels with what's going on Call the Midwife with the Turners and May, and that very botched, that whole really tough situation, which I'm really glad they're exploring, because that is an ethical nightmare.
It is on all sorts of levels. Ethical and cultural. It's kind of a real difficult thing to think about, because if you think about her, she might get everything she needs physically from the Turners or materially, but she won't have her culture in the same way she might with her mother, and still get everything she needs emotionally from her mother. So it's interesting. I'm curious. I'm definitely curious to see how that happens with Downton Abbey, how they position it.
Yeah, it's quite it's interesting. It's kind of positioned in sort of the opposite way, if I'm remembering correctly, where on this show a lot of the argument is like, can May's mother really provide you know, financial support if she loses her job, et cetera, et cetera. And on Downton Abbey, it's sort of assumed that Edith can take care of her child better than anybody else, and so they quite literally like take her away from her adopted family, and that's considered like the right thing to do. So it's framed from a different perspective. But yeah, it's an interesting show in general for a lot of the same reasons that you might like Downton Abbey. There's also some really great childbirth plots and some very intense childbirth plot lines. So yeah, check it out. If you haven't seen Downton Abbey, now's your shot. You should do it.
For me, I'm going to go the opposite way, exactly opposite, and I'm going to do a documentary called The Business of Being Born. I found it really interesting. It takes on the opposite of what we see in Call the Midwife, which is it takes on the American hospital birthing system and what's right with it, what's wrong with it, and sort of where we can go from here, which is, I found it to be really interesting. Yeah. Ananda, do you have any recommendations you might want to share?
I'm not sure if I do. There's just so little in terms of television programming that has looked at childbirth. And this is the show that I've been, you know, I was waiting for so long. I'll just say what not to watch. I would not recommend The Tiger King.
Oh, that's great. Actually, we've never had it. If you like this, don't watch that. This is perfect.
Don't watch that. And, you know, I think what I love about Call the Midwife and the role that's, you know, that stories play in human experience is that we get to, they're cathartic. We get to see how someone else manages to get through a situation that either we've been through ourselves or maybe we haven't, but it touches something in us that we can relate to. And I just felt like The Tiger King did the opposite of that. So
it was definitely very spectacle. And
I felt like those are hours of my life I can't get back. And I'd rather, you know, I just appreciate so much a show like Call the Midwife.
That's fantastic. I
do agree. It's not the same audience at all.
Well, thank you for that. That's perfect. We are now going to go into another segment, which we love very much. Most Valuable Midwife. Always a tough call because they're all very valuable and we love them all very much. But this week we have done the work. We have decided on who we think is the top dog. Would you like to go first, Andrea?
I will. I know that we talked a lot about the Maureen situation in this episode and what great work Lucille did on that. But I honestly think that I found the emotional stress of the May situation much more harder to navigate. And I think that Sister Julianne offering to step in and to help it along with the Turners on the Turner side, and then also with May's mother. I believe they were calling her Edith. Esther, which I'm sure I'm getting her confused with Lady Edith from earlier now.
That's my fault. Sorry.
Very confident Esther's not her real name, but here we are. I thought that was very interesting and very difficult because she sort of stepped in and tried to assure everybody that the right decision would be made. And I really appreciated that. And I feel like I always say Sister Julianne, though, because I love Jenny Agutter and she doesn't make me work. And I just feel so reassured by her that I know I would be like, okay, all right, you got a handle on this. I trust you to make sure my kid's okay. Maybe not in real life, but, you know, she was my most valuable midwife this week.
All extremely valid points. And I do agree she is so soothing. I would love to hang out with her. Ananda, do you have a favorite midwife from this week or someone who you think really like punched above their weight class? Maybe a less violent.
It's hard to choose because I really admired a number of different moments in the show. I'm going to go with the midwife, although for some reason her name's escaping me right this moment, but she was present at Maureen's birth and she's related to Maureen. And that is Nurse Val.
Yes.
And just a very simple moment that stood out for me was when Maureen is pushing out the baby. Val is saying to her, "You're doing so well. You're fantastic. You've got it."
Yeah.
And it's I mean, for birth nerds out there, we'll probably get what I'm saying, but since the 1950s and 60s, when this show takes place, we have evolved to a time right now where our maternity caregivers sometimes command and tell women what to do in order to push the baby out.
Yeah.
And she was so peaceful about it. She's practicing in a time in the 1960s where that shift to kind of heavily coaching women was just starting to come into fashion. And that's where we are now. And a lot of women give birth while people are kind of loudly directing them as to what to do, and push. That stereotype that we see in the movies, it really does happen. And there are some of us who feel like women give birth in spite of that, those heavy commands, because our bodies, it's an involuntary process to push the baby out. And so to have her just so sweetly say, "You're doing it," which they say all through labor. But for me, again, the kind of the birth nerd part of me noticed that it was happening during that last phase of labor, when the baby's actually being pushed out. And when in real life in 2020, that's when we often see the kind of the most shouting being directed at the woman during her birth at the end of the process. And so just the fact that she was so lovely in the end and said, "You're you're doing it. Here it comes." I just, to me, it's small but mighty.
Yes.
Kindness that she extended.
I love that. I actually have another person too. So I'm going to say Lucille, because I think that she did such wonderful work with the entire family, taking care of Warren and supporting mom, dad, and the kids. And that just has to be the worst possible day at work in some ways. So the fact that she was able to do such a nice job with them and support them was really great. And she's just like a ray of sunshine. So I'm always pro Lucille. I will also say the fact that she has her personal house in order with her relationship and is able to say, like, stand her ground with her boyfriend and be like, "Look, respect me and my job," and then apologize when she gets it wrong.
Yeah.
She's just nailing it. Team Lucille all around.
Anybody who can apologize when they also feel like they've been wronged is like aces. She's a winner.
Yeah, exactly.
So can we go to see if anybody weighed in on social and if there's any favorite midwives popping up on our Twitter?
Oh, we sure can. So we don't actually have any favorite midwife votes yet. However, we have 3 nice comments in a row on Facebook that I will read. We have AJ, who watches the show all the time, saying, "Good points. Thank you, AJ.
Thanks,
Appreciate
AJ.
it." Sarah says, "Hi. Hi, Sarah. Thanks for watching."
Howdy.
And another Sarah says, "Downton," crying face emoji, broken heart emoji, praise hands emoji. Yes, you summed it up, Sarah. That's exactly the deal with Downton. And as we've started doing every week, we are going to read the closing monologue as our comment of the day, tweeted as always by at Kathy Ginter on Twitter, who we really adore for doing this important service for us. So this week's: "Not every garden blooms as we expected. Despite our care, not every child can thrive. Tears take the place of rain, and the sunshine fails us. But the buds, however delicate, were perfect. They were real, and their fleeting scent will live forever on the air." Whew. Heavy monologue this week, but it was a heavy week in general. So
It was.
that kind of tracks.
It was. And on that note, if you're still watching, thank you for joining us. We're going to head out for this week. Thank you, Ananda Lowe, for joining us. We were so excited to have you, an expert, on the show this week, so we could talk to you a little bit more about the doula side of things. And join us again next week where we talk about episode 7. Correct, Jackie?
That is correct.
Correct.
Yes.
I did it.
What week is it? We don't know, but we know episode 7 is coming up next.
Episode 7 next week. And we'll see you then. Have a great week, everybody. Stay safe.
Bye, everyone.